Afternoon. Let's see if we can get a rise out of you. Good afternoon. There you go. Now you're on a college campus, right? My name is Harlan Sands, and I'm president of Cleveland State University. Welcome to all of you and our distinguished guests. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, the Honorable Marcia Fudge, my friend, U.S. Senator Sherrod Brown, elected officials, members and leaders of the Black Homeownership Collaborative, CSU students, and all of the rest of you joining us today. We're really, really glad that you've chosen Cleveland State for this important day. We're honored to host you as we celebrate Juneteenth today, which is a holiday at Cleveland State, I might add. You have come to the right place. The focus of this conference is well aligned to our mission at Cleveland State. We're an anchor institution for our city and the region. We serve almost 17,000 undergraduate and graduate students. And as a public urban research university, our mission and our passion are serving and supporting our community, and our diverse core of faculty, staff, and students reflect our city roots. Our brand of urban-centric education is uniquely critical to our region's growth, and we know that education is the most important thing to social mobility, and homeownership is a key component of that. The data is clear. A decline over the past 20 years left Black homeownership rates at 42%, as low as it was in 1970, while white homeownership is around 70%. Owning a home is one of the main drivers of wealth in our country, particularly across generations, which makes increasing Black homeownership a critical goal in addressing our overarching racial wealth gap. So I'm excited to be part of this conference and to kick it off today and build new approaches to housing finance and investments with our leaders that you're seeing on the podium today. So thank you, Secretary Fudge, who many of you know is also an alum, our first alum to become a cabinet secretary. So we are so honored. So before we turn over the program to our stars, first we're going to start with an introduction by Mayor Jackson. Roll tape.
Hello, I'm Mayor Frank Jackson, and I want to first welcome Secretary Fudge back to the city of Cleveland and say to her and all of the people in attendance that the city of Cleveland is in support of the 7-point plan to increase home ownership by 3 million homeowners by the year 2030. Home ownership among Black people is plummeting, and it continues to fall. There's several reasons. It could be from lack of affordable housing, down payment assistance, or lending practices, many different reasons. But the point is that we have to address whatever those systemic issues are that are impacting Black people in their inability to be homeowners. I look forward to the conclusion, and we in Cleveland look to implement and work with all the people involved and organizations involved to ensure that we can increase Black home ownership by 3 million people in the year 2030. So thank you very much.
I should also mention we're also joined today by Representative Tim Ryan. Thank you for being here and joining us. And now I'd like to introduce David Dworkin, President and CEO of the National Housing Conference, the nation's oldest housing coalition, and a leader of the Black Homeownership Collaborative. Well, let's give a warm round of applause for David. Welcome.
Thank you, President Sands. We are grateful to you, your students, and your brilliant faculty and staff for sharing this beautiful campus and facility with us today. A particular thank you to Barbara Kakiris from your office and Ron Carson from the Secretary's office, who made this event possible, and Elena McCargo, who made all of our work possible. And I just want to say that before she joined the Secretary's office, Elena was an integral part of this initiative, and her nickname was, how does she do that? So, thank you. Welcome to all of our honored guests who we have with us today, especially Secretary Fudge and Chairman Brown. We look forward to hearing from you in just a few moments. And we also have with us other VIPs, State Rep Tom West and Cuyahoga Council Vice President Cheryl Stevens, and Cleveland State University Law School Dean Lee Fisher. Thank you all for being here. And any others I missed, I apologize. Today is the culmination of nearly 2 years of work and the beginning of an important step forward for our nation. A new collaboration of housing industry advocacy and civil rights leaders are proud to announce a multi-year initiative to increase Black homeownership in America. I am honored to speak on behalf of the Black Homeownership Collaborative to launch the 3x30 initiative, the collaborative's 7-point plan to produce 3 million net new Black homeowners by the end of 2030. By the end of 2019, the home ownership rate for Black Americans was as low as it was in 1968 when the Fair Housing Act was signed. If we do nothing, the Urban Institute projects it will go even lower and remain there for the next 20 years. The 3x30 initiative aims to significantly narrow this unacceptable gap through tangible, measurable, and actionable steps for change. Working together, we can create 3 million net new Black homeowners, a level never seen before, increasing the Black homeownership rate to well over 50%. This goal is audacious, extraordinarily challenging, and absolutely achievable if we all work together. It requires a multifaceted strategy that addresses all of the major root causes simultaneously. It's worth briefly noting how we got here, because the gap was in fact beginning to close in the late 1990s, and the subprime mortgage crisis destroyed that progress. When the housing markets imploded more than a decade ago, it was blamed on a tempting but false narrative that the crash was the result of too many people buying homes they could not afford with mortgages for which they were unqualified. Certainly, there was some of this, but the real story in the African American community is very different. Most of them were already homeowners with good mortgages for homes they could afford. They were serially refinanced into toxic loans never designed to be repaid. Having had the equity stripped from their homes, they were quickly swept away with the collapse of the housing economy, a collapse that spared few but hit Black Americans a lot harder and for much longer than any other racial or ethnic group. Many of us in this room have worked for years with great dedication to address the problem. We are passionate people working in organizations that do a lot of great work. We're also naturally competitive people whose institutions can find themselves siloed. There's always the risk that these factors can become counterproductive and make it harder for us to achieve our shared objectives. So we came together and agreed we could accomplish much more through our collaboration. This was the origin of the Black Homeownership Collaborative. This work has come together in the 3x30 initiative and its 7-point plan were led by a steering committee consisting of the National Housing Conference, the Mortgage Bankers Association, the NAACP, the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, the National Association of Realtors, the National Fair Housing Alliance, and the National Urban League. This initiative is guided by groundbreaking research from the Urban Institute. Because we believe we can build momentum toward a nation where the American dream of homeownership will be truly available to all Americans, we know that to achieve these goals, everyone must work together. Conservatives and progressives, federal, state, and housing and local governments, the private and nonprofit sectors, advocates and practitioners, all of us moving together. We know we can do this, so let's go to work, because nothing can stop us on this journey to right a multi-generational wrong. Now I have the pleasure to present to you the Honorable Marcia Fudge. I have to remember, even if I just say your name, I have to wait for the applause. Secretary of the Department of Housing and Urban Development of the United States. Rather than read you her bio, which is impressive enough, let me share with you some of the thoughts of her colleagues who know her best. President Biden has said she developed an entire career fighting for working people on issues from affordable housing to urban revitalization. During the Great Recession, her district was hit hard by the housing crisis. She spent the past decade working to improve blighted neighborhoods, create safer, more affordable communities. She also understands where you live impacts your health, access to education, jobs, and economic opportunity. And her Ohio colleague, Senator Rob Portman, says, "My experience and that of respected members of the Cleveland community who know her well is that she has worked collaboratively to tackle challenges, working across party lines and with the business community. I can speak to her integrity, her commitment to justice, and the strength of her character. I think she's got a public servant's heart, and I think she's in it for all the right reasons." She was first elected to Congress, or when you were first elected to Congress, people knew in Cleveland here that you had big shoes to fill following icons like Lou Stokes and Stephanie Tubbs Jones. And in my estimation, those shoes are looking pretty tight today. Ladies and gentlemen, the 18th Secretary of the Department of Housing and Urban Development, the Honorable Marcia Fudge.
Thank you very, very much. Somebody has my notebook. I'm not sure who. How's everybody? When I said there's no place like home, I meant that. It is so good to be at home. I've been gone for about a month and a half, and I was looking so forward to coming home, and I see so many of my friends here, and I'm not certainly going to start to name any of you. But of course, when you have family, you definitely have to do that. Bob Sappho, wave your hand. I have so many, many friends. Let me start by this, because this is what housing makes me feel like. President Sands, who I have come to know and is a dear, dear friend. Of course, the senator from the great state of Ohio. Lisa and David, thank you so much for having me. Well, son, I tell you, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. It's had tacks in it, and splinters, and boards torn up, and places with no carpet on the floor, bare. But all the time, I's been a-climbing on, and reaching landings, and turning corners, and sometimes going in the dark, where there ain't been no light. So boy, don't you turn back. Don't you sit down on the steps 'cause you find it kind of hard. Don't you fall now, for I see, I still going, honey. I'm still climbing, and life for me ain't been no crystal stair. And life for the people in this community that I serve ain't been no crystal stair. I'm so honored to be here to let you know that there is a new day at HUD. There is a new time at HUD. Danielle, I know you're on the program. How you doing? And Cybe and all of my former colleagues, it's great to see you. I know what it's like for you to be someplace in the middle of the afternoon, so I thank you. Hey, Tanya. I'm here to celebrate the launch of your bold 7-point plan to help 3 million Black families realize the dream of homeownership. I want to thank all the housing advocates and civil rights leaders who will speak on today's panel, and to everyone joining us today. This is a fitting moment for us to rally around the cause of advancing equality and opportunity in Black communities. We all know the old saying, when America catches a cold, black folk get pneumonia. But we are coming out of it. We are coming out of it. Just yesterday, the president signed a bill to make Juneteenth a national holiday in this country. Many of us are certainly familiar with the story behind Juneteenth. We know that when Abraham Lincoln actually issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which was in September of 1862, that announcement sparked what we call jubilation. In fact, Cleveland actually hosted one of the very first inaugural Freedmen's Festivals in 1863, and welcomed abolitionist Frederick Douglass as a result. Yet it would take several years of bloody civil war before every black person in America was finally freed from bondage. More than 1,000 days passed between the first signing of the Emancipation Proclamation and June of 1865. Think about that. Over 1,000 days that they did not tell people they were free. Each year, Juneteenth reminds us that too often in our history, the march toward freedom has been a long, halting, and uneven journey. It is a journey that has seen us go through Reconstruction and Jim Crow, through the Civil Rights Movement, and through Black Lives Matter, through the Black Power movement. While our country has continued to make strides since the first Juneteenth celebrations, today, too many African Americans don't feel free. Too many of us feel the weight of a criminal justice system that is stacked against us, that deprives us of our physical freedom. Too many of us cannot live a life that is free from the burden of poverty, a life that is free from the struggle to put food on our tables, clothes on our backs, and a roof over our head. Too many of us are unable to enjoy what Franklin Roosevelt once called freedom from want. This is due in large part to our nation's long and destructive legacy of systemic racism. It is due to the fact that local governments erected barriers and prevented black families from moving into neighborhoods with better schools, better jobs, cleaner air, and cleaner water. It is due to the fact that in one place after another, predominantly black neighborhoods were systemically locked out of opportunity. Banks, insurance companies, and other financial institutions denied credit to African Americans through redlining. Those days are done. Those days are done in this HUD. As a result, black businesses could not access the capital they needed to expand their operations, and black families found themselves unable to secure mortgages. This situation played out right here in my hometown, which I was telling all of my friends the other day, Avery, is the best location in the nation. But in my hometown, in areas such as Huff and Mount Pleasant and Glenville, for decades, these neighborhoods and others like them suffered a severe shortage of both public and private investment. The same holds true for black communities across America, whether it be St. Louis or Seattle or Minneapolis or Memphis or Tallahassee or Tulsa. It is long past time that our government finally breaks down the barriers which still limit the futures of far too many black people. And that is exactly what the Biden-Harris administration is working to do. On his very first day in office, President Biden signed an executive order directing, not asking, directing our government to explore bold solutions for advancing racial equity in America. Now, people always ask me, what is equity? Equity is what is right, what is fair. You know, say, oh, let me just tell you what equity is. I live in this county, Cuyahoga County, and I had to explain this to one of my colleagues one day before I left the great House of Representatives. I'm so glad to be gone. But so I told him, I live in a county with over 1 million people. Let's say the county next to me has 10,000 people. We each have one polling place. It's equal because we all have the same number, but it's not equitable. It's just not fair. I believe in fairness. And at some point, our country has to get there. I know, staff, my staff is looking like me. You are all off your script. We all know that home ownership is the cornerstone of the American dream. For most people, it is still the best way to build a source of wealth that can pass down from generation to generation. Yet the stark reality is that for too many, the dream is becoming harder and harder to achieve. In recent years, the home ownership gap, and David said that, between black and white families reached its widest point since 1968, when banks could still legally discriminate. Imagine that today they can't, but the numbers are the same. One major reason behind it is the widening gap in the crippling burden of student debt that plagues many African Americans. You know who carries student debt? Black people, brown people, poor people. According to the Brookings Institute, the average black graduate owes nearly $52,000 in student loans, while the average white graduate owes closer to $28,000. In addition, black students are less likely than white students to receive financial support from their families to help pay for school. And black graduates are more likely to take out loans from private lenders that carry higher interest rates. Our country must close the racial wealth gap by helping more hardworking black people, including those with student debt, to buy their first home. And I'm proud to announce that the Department of Housing and Urban Development is taking action that will make it easier for borrowers with student debt to qualify for a federally guaranteed mortgage. Just think about it. As a result of what we're doing today, let me just give you some figures. Let's say it is now possible for an American who earns $50,000 a year and carries $75,000 in student loans to secure a HUD-insured mortgage in the amount of $225,000. Each year, HUD helps roughly 100,000 black homes to purchase homes, and nearly 40% of the borrowers we support hold some form of student debt. So over time, our new policy can make a big difference for folks in cities, small towns, rural communities throughout our nation. And moving forward, we will work together with the Department of Education to explore further solutions that can help more Americans burdened with student debt. You know, let me come off of this script here for 1 second. I want you to know that I work for an administration that knows what it means to work hard, for people to struggle, for poor people to want to better their lives and the lives of their children. And so if we send our children to college, we should not be burdened because we are trying to make them have a better life, to do better in this world. And so I am proud today to say that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris know what we are living through. We're going to do everything we possibly can to make sure that every single person has an opportunity to build wealth for their families. And Lisa, we're going to do it in a fair way. We have never fully embraced the Fair Housing Act in this country. Today, we're doing that. When I say it's a new day in HUD, it is a new day in HUD. I'm just gonna close with this, and this is something that I tell my staff. I don't know what else I was supposed to say, but they'll figure it out and they'll tell you. But I'm gonna close with this, and this is how I think about the work that we are doing. Many of you know, if you know me well, you know I'm very, very steeped in my faith. So in the Bible, there is a story of Nehemiah. Nehemiah was determined to build back the walls of Jerusalem when they were torn down by the Babylons. And so the Babylonians kept saying, "Come down, I need to talk to you, Nehemiah." And he just kept building, and he just kept building. And as the walls got higher and higher, they tried even harder and harder. So Nehemiah finally said to them, "I cannot come down. I'm doing a great work, and I cannot come down." That's where we are with HUD. We are doing a great work, and we will not come down. We're doing a great work.
Secretary Fudge, you have done my heart so good, you just do not know. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lisa Rice, and I'm the CEO and President of the National Fair Housing Alliance. Secretary Fudge, I'm trying to hold back the emotions. You took up a text, you're talking about fair housing. I'm not going to be able to sit still. But I am here right now for this moment because it is my distinct honor to introduce to you, to bring to the podium, one of our nation's greatest legislators, hands down. He has devoted his career to ensuring that people have dignity of work, that fair housing and fair lending are a reality in our communities, that every American has quality health care access, that our children can have an excellent education, and that people can lead productive, meaningful lives. I learned just how dedicated this man is and how committed he is to justice when working with him on the Consumer Protection and Wall Street Reform Act, a little over 10 years ago. His commitment and dedication to ending predatory lending and creating a fairer financial system for hardworking people was truly commendable. His energy seemed boundless and limitless. Let me tell you, if we were there at 1 o'clock in the morning working on legislation, so was he. So was he. And as chairman of the Senate's Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs, he is helping to lead the effort to build more sorely needed affordable housing, eliminating appraisal bias, fighting AI and technology discrimination, and ensuring that we rebuild this nation's infrastructure in a way that is equitable for everyone in this country. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome my senator, the senior senator from Ohio, Sherrod Brown.
You were good on the phone the other day, too, by the way. Lisa Rice, thank you. She doesn't tell you she's from Toledo, so she has to say that when you're in Cleveland. But she is a national star now, and she hasn't forgotten Toledo, and Toledo certainly hasn't forgotten her. So it is that. Well, not in Cleveland. It's not the center of the university. It's close enough. David, thank you, and Tim Ryan and Tom, nice to see you, and your daughter, nursing student, doing big things. So thank you all. And Secretary Fudge is my former congresswoman, but federal law doesn't allow you to do two jobs at once. Doesn't allow you to be a congresswoman and Secretary of HUD, but she's still my congresswoman. So, right, Chantel, right? I mean, she and Danielle, she's still our congresswoman. So at least for a while. So. Thank you, Marcia, and it's always great to be here, and your significant work on housing is so important. Lisa was testified in front of our committee already this year. We did the first hearing ever in the Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee on structural racism in our housing system, something Marcia talks about so passionately, and you and this group understand, and she was one of our most important witnesses on that, so thank you. David, thank you also, too. It's wonderful to be back in this city. I'm here every week, almost every week. My wife and I live in southeast side of Cleveland, as I said, in Marcia's district. It's wonderful, especially to be back on the eve of Juneteenth. The Juneteenth happened because of activists in the Naacp and the Urban League and citizens that care about this standing up. And this bill passed the Senate unanimously this month. Pretty amazing. Signed, as Marcia said, signed by the president. Only a few really far-right nut jobs in the House voted against it. But other than that, it was almost unanimous. And it's ask people in this country if they knew what Juneteenth was 5 or 10 years ago. And it's going to become a holiday that we celebrate and learn about and talk about history in this country until we really do erase the stains of slavery. And we haven't done that well as a nation, putting it mildly, and this will help to do that in a big way. And I think our children and grandchildren will look back at this and think, of course we recognize Juneteenth is such an important day as we learn, as particularly white America learns more and more about that. As my colleague Joyce Beatty says, and Tim's colleague, Marcia's former colleague, says, we can't change our history, but we can chart a better course. That's what the Black Homeownership Collaborative is working to do. We know homeownership, and I appreciate both President Sands and Dave Dworkin's comments about sort of the history of 1968. 1960, you know, it took 4 years to pass fair housing. We had passed, and as a nation, passed civil rights and voting rights. 3 and 4 years earlier, couldn't pass fair housing until Dr. King's assassination. Then President Nixon hired to be his Secretary of HUD, one of her predecessors, Governor Romney of Michigan, the father of Mitt Romney, who wanted to do the right thing, and President Nixon instead pursued the Southern strategy and simply locked down what Marcia Fudge is reopening and making happen with fair housing. That's why we know we can make progress, because all Americans should have the opportunity to own a house, and that it is disgraceful that we as a nation, that black homeownership is still so far behind ownership for the rest of the homeownership for the rest of the country. And we know perhaps the most persistent, insidious legacy of slavery is homeownership and is housing overall. As I said, the committee I chair is called the Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee. I became chair of that committee in February. That committee's referred to in Washington by senators and by the media just generally as the Senate Banking Committee. That committee was all about Wall Street, little about housing, as Lisa knows, and damn near nothing about urban affairs. Those days are behind us. You'll never hear me call it the Senate Banking Committee. I'll call it Banking and Housing. Sometimes, Madam Secretary, I call it Housing and Banking. Someday, in some days when we have a larger majority, we will change the name officially. So count on that, and you will be there when we do it. But that first ever hearing we did on structural racism in the Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee, we talked about from black codes to Jim Crow to redlining to the Trump administration locking in discriminatory housing practices with the abandonment of the affirmative furthering housing goal, fair housing goal, and all the other things that were happening. The fair housing is, like I mentioned, fair housing took longer to pass through Congress than voting rights, than desegregation of public spaces, even longer than equal opportunities for employment. Generations of black families were locked out. We all know that, locked out of the opportunity to get an affordable mortgage. I think with a celebration every year of Juneteenth, Americans will understand better how the New Deal and how redlining and how black codes and how Jim Crow locked black families out of these opportunities. We still live with the consequences. Take a walk around Cleveland, as the secretary said, where you still see the scars of the foreclosure crisis in the same neighborhoods that were colored red, the outline of red in the maps of the 1930s. Come to my zip code where Connie and I live in Slavic Village, 44105. My zip code, the zip code I live in that Marcia represented, had more foreclosures in the first half of 2007, Danielle, than any zip code in the whole United States of America, and you still see the scars. In those same neighborhoods, you'll find the highest rates of lead exposure in toxic pollution and infant mortality. You will see in neighborhoods which had foundries that maybe closed 30 or 40 years ago, kids playing in the soil, playing in the yard, and that soil is contaminated with metals that still cause brain damage to those children. Take a look at maps of COVID-19 deaths. They match up with those red line maps pretty well. Our past is still determining people's lives today. That's the importance of Juneteenth, understanding that. That's the significance of this administration and Secretary Fudge being HUD secretary to fix that. That's why her work matters. It's why the work on this my committee matters. It's why the Black Homeownership Collaborative 7-point plan matters. Think of those infrastructure investments. Again, look at history. Think of the infrastructure investments this country made in the 1930s and in the years after World World War II. Remember how we created millions and millions of new homeowners and grew the middle class in places like Levittown and places like Cleveland, all over the country. There's no reason we can't do the same again, but this time we bring everyone along instead of instead of holding Black Americans back. We do it, as Marcia said, we do it with targeted down payment assistance. We invest in lower cost homes that need repairs and turn them into quality homes that people can afford. People will be paying, in many cases, once they can get over the burden, getting over the hurdle of down payments, people will be paying less in their mortgage than they now pay in their rent. Imagine that. We expand consumer protections so that payday lenders can't prey on people, particularly people of color. We root out racial discrimination in all parts of our housing system, including, as Lisa Rice just said a moment ago, including appraisals. We create a new generation of Black homeowners. We work with Secretary Fudge, with the Black Homeownership Collaborative, to turn this plan into action. There's a role for all of you in the housing industry to play. The same way that activists pushed Congress finally to move on Juneteenth, we have a wide range of partners here today, from mortgage lenders to civil rights leaders to researchers, who came together to design this plan because you understand intuitively and substantively the legacy of discrimination. You see the opportunities we can seize to build a diverse, thriving middle class in Cleveland and all over the country. You work directly with Ohio families hoping to finally own their own home. You use their stories, you use their experience, you help us identify and eliminate disparities and discrimination in mortgage options, in credit scores, in appraisals. Dr. King, in his letter from the Birmingham Jail, I will tell a real quick story and then wrap up. But Dr. King did every year I assemble 6 senators, 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats, to join me on the Senate floor, and we read the letter from Dr. King's letter from the Birmingham Jail. And you remember, I assume all of you have read that letter, and I ask all of you to read it again. It's just the power of that letter. But you remember in 1963, Dr. King, of course, in jail in Birmingham, the white minister said, Dr. King, they had sent a letter to Dr. King and said, Dr. King, we support civil rights, we support voting rights, we support equality, but not too fast, Dr. King. Be patient, we're going to make this happen. Of course, he wasn't patient. How could he be patient? So he wrote on scraps of paper this letter back to the white ministers that has become the very famous letter from Birmingham Jail. But my favorite, maybe my favorite King quote was right in the middle of that letter that I read on the Senate floor every year. He said, progress never rolls in on wheels of inevitability. Progress never rolls in on wheels of inevitability. We know progress rolls in because of people like Marcia Fudge and Lisa Rice and David Dworkin and Leif and so many of you in this crowd. People, all of you, as you push, you challenge the status quo, you dedicate your lives to progress. 4 years of Marcia Fudge as HUD secretary. I hope it's 8. 4 years of Marcia Fudge as secretary of HUD. Marcia's about my age, so she's got at least 8 more years to do here. 4 years of her as secretary, 4 years of this president, 4 years of this vice president. We're going to have that progress. We're going to make it together, and I thank all of you for being part of it.
Okay, the rest of the nation who is watching this on C-SPAN, I know is envious. We've got the Secretary of HUD who hails from Ohio, one of the greatest legislators in the nation from Ohio. I think Ohio really is the center of the universe. Touche, touche. Yes, sir. Yes, no, everybody knows that Ohio is my home. And now I want to bring to the podium another great leader from the state of Ohio, Congressman Tim Ryan. He served in the Ohio State Senate from 2001 to 2003, and since then, he has represented the Youngstown area in the House of Representatives. During his time in the House, Congressman Ryan has served on the Appropriations Committee and co-chaired the Congressional Manufacturing Caucus, which works to improve American industrial policy to make it easier for American workers to provide for their families and build wealth. The Congressman has been a champion for Northwest Ohio during his time in office, working to make college more affordable, revitalize cities like Youngstown and Cleveland, and really working to improve the quality of life for hardworking families in America. Ladies and gentlemen, Congressman Tim Ryan. I almost said Senator Tim Ryan. I'm serious, I did, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
I can think of worse things. Thank you. Two extremely tough acts to follow. When you're a sitting congressman for 19 years, sitting in the front row, and you're like, oh my God, I love these two guys. So thank you so much. We are so lucky to have Secretary Fudge. I'm not going to lie, when I got the email invite for this event, and having worked with Marcia for so long, and I just thought, man, this is really cool. My friend is the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, and I know you all feel the same way, so what an honor it is for us, Marcia. And I hate following Sherrod Brown, for the record. We're so lucky, and I just want to take 2 minutes, but we are so lucky because we are leaving an era in this country of politicians that have magic wands that they could wave, and they're going to fix everything, and we don't need to work together. It's just going to somehow get done. And what I like about the 7-point plan is that it is absolutely grounded in reality. It looks clearly at the root causes of the problem around housing for black people in the United States of America, looks directly at it. All the pain, all the heartache, all the suffering, and it sees it, and then it says, we don't have a magic wand. There's going to be a great deal of collaboration. It's got to be multifaceted. It's got to be about counseling and education and money and finance. It's got to be all of these different things that have to happen if we are going to solve the problem. And what I love most about what Senator Brown was talking about, what this administration is talking about, is it is about digging in and doing the hard work necessary to get the job done to help people. And that's what this government is saying. And from the Appropriations Committee, I'm committing to all of you to help fund these programs because, if we pass tax cuts that go to the top 1% of the people in the country, nobody asks, how do we get the money for all that? But the second you want to start spending money in communities that have been disinvested in for 30 or 40 years, everyone wants to know how much is that going to cost. So here we are today with a plan, with the leadership in the United States Senate, with the leadership in the United States Cabinet, the leadership at the highest levels from the President and the Vice President, leadership in the House Committee on Appropriations, to put plans like this into place, to fund them, and to move the needle. That's what we're committed to do for the people of Cleveland and Youngstown and Akron and Birmingham and Columbia, South Carolina, and all across the United States. And it starts by us coming together, not being divided. And there are a lot of people in this country today that want to keep the poor and the working people of this country, whether they're white or black or brown or gay or straight, they want to keep them divided. The worst nightmare is when we come together, because that's when we can begin the business of the hard work that makes the deep structural changes that we need to make, and we're all committed to doing that. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Thank you, Congressman Ryan. That was really great. And Senator Brown, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate it. And I just want to recognize now two of our partners at the podium, members of our collaborative, who are going to be a huge part of having put this together, but also the next 9 years of incredibly difficult work ahead of us. I'd like to welcome first NAACP's president of the Cleveland chapter, Danielle Sidner.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I have to first say, my mother gave me better home training. I usually wouldn't have been in a track jacket and jeans and tennis shoes, but I had to be down at Mall C at 7:50 this morning with Kicking It with Kenny, and I've been running ever since because we have Juneteenth events happening all over the city. So those of you that are in town, that are staying, visit Mall C, visit Buckeye, visit Huff, visit Fairfax. We will be all over the place tomorrow. But again, I'm bringing you greetings on behalf of our national president and CEO, Derek Johnson, who couldn't be here today. We are excited that this is happening here in Cleveland as we're talking about Black home ownership, because we know how important it is to a city that elected the first Black mayor to a major metropolitan city to be having an announcement like this happen today. What we think about is systemic racism and racist policies and lending practices have impeded the Black community's ability to really increase our net worth. And so thinking about home ownership as really a foundational tool in doing that, it is important that this plan is committed to seeing through to fruition the access that we need in the Black community as it relates to home ownership. And that's access to credit, including down payment assistance, tax credit assistance, fair lending practices. All of those things are needed. Ultimately, we know one of the biggest barriers, though, is access to credit. It's access to credit in home ownership, and then the ability to tap into that to do things like send your kids to college, to be able to start a business, to remodel your home, to keep up with the Joneses or whoever else you want to keep up with. So the most important thing that we're asking for now is that the Office of Comptroller of Currency would ensure access to credit remains open to underserved communities, including strongly enforcing fair credit reporting laws. And so over the next couple of hours, I know we're going to be doing more discussion around this topic, but again, I want to thank you all for being here. The NAACP is a proud member of this collaborative, and we know that we have lots of work to do together. So thank you so much. Thank you all.
And last but absolutely not least, Cybe Richardson from the National Urban League, who is also co-chair of the Black Homeownership Collaborative and has been deep in the trenches with us. So thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Very nice to be here with you. As it's typically said, everything's been said, but not by everyone. So I'll just give just a few observations on how it feels and how compelled we are to be a part of this collaborative. I'm bringing greetings from my boss, my organization, the National Urban League. We are the nation's oldest and largest community-based movement dedicated to empowering African Americans to sustain themselves in the social and economic mainstream. And this collaborative, this mission, is central to our theory of change and central to the economic development prospects for Black America. Just three observations. Again, this collaborative feels different. The ethos of sharing, the ethos of collaboration, but it's the notion of it's amazing what can be accomplished when no one cares who gets the credit. That's what we're proffering here. We're coming together with shared interests. Yes, perhaps wearing different jerseys, but working, sweating, bleeding for the same team. In many ways led by Secretary Fudge. I can't imagine the number of plans and great ideas that she had to step over when she rolled up at 451 7th Avenue Southwest. But I'll say this plan is both a white glove treatment of the problem with some of the best researchers in the country, with a blue collar approach to the solutions. And I think that's what makes us unique here. The second thing I'll say is the country, cities, states, regions are going through reopenings, economic reopenings. And I think that is very important. We've reached a tipping point. But let's be clear, this collaborative and its ideals and programs is not designed to take us back to March 2020. This is a plan built on reimagining the future. This is not taking us back. This is a forward-thinking document. And I think that's the most important element that we're offering today. We are turning the page with a committed, focus-like effort. So the last thing I'll say is what could go wrong, right? What could be in our way? What are the barriers? We will need some blocking and tackling, Secretary. But But I'll tell you that the main thing here is that we all are supportive one direction. There are others, other interests, other individuals meeting somewhere in this country that are threatened by these ideals, that are insecure with this notion of equity and economic development for people in communities of color, for household balance sheets. That's something we have to understand and fight through, put our shoulder into the wind. Fight it, understand it, and fight it. Also, though, what can trip us up internally? Again, this collaborative is unique in the sense that traditionally NAACP, Urban League, are told, well, your civil rights groups, you're over there, that's your table there. This is the affordable housing ecosystem. See, this collaborative creates a Venn diagram. We have overlapping interests, shared interests. Again, each of us contributing what we can to the objective, 3 by 30. So I would say, channeling my old Professor Cornel West, we do need to be wary against, as he would say, becoming intoxicated with the felicities of our own bourgeois existence. Let's not do that. Or as my wife would say, boy, you're too certain of your rightness. Let's not do that either. But let's understand, we are proffering an idea rooted in data, rooted in commitment with leaders on this stage. So I would say, from the Urban League, a little bit of a call and response, are you with us? But again, you're here. You've demonstrated your commitment to this work. Thank you. So watch this space, as you say. A lot is going on. A lot will happen. Watch this space. So moving towards the next part of the agenda, we have a little bit of a networking opportunity for folks. Again, we're trying to recreate an ecosystem, a community of practice and advocacy. Let's take this next time to get to meet each other, share our concerns, share our vulnerabilities and insecurities, all towards the spotlight on 3 for 30, 3 by 30. So after the networking activities, we will have 2 panels this afternoon. That will be a wonderful kind of dive in to the details. That's how we'll get there, the details. Please pay attention. Thanks so much for being here. Again, thank you, Secretary Fudge, Senator Brown. Thank you very much. Second part of the program coming up. Thank you.
And they're going to set up the stage, and we'll meet back here in 10 minutes.
Thank you, my dear.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good weekend. Enjoy your weekend
You
home.
too.
All right? Be in touch.
Elena, you were going to start us off? Yeah. Elena's going to introduce Jung. So I've already introduced Elena. She needs no introduction. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Thank you. I know we're a little behind schedule, so thank you all for being here. First of all, this is a really important day. It means a lot to me to be able to have a part in this. From a slightly different seat, I was previously with the Urban Institute and helped to launch this work and did a lot of the research, and this has been work that has meant so much to me in terms of figuring out how we can close these racial homeownership gaps that have persisted in this country. And I have the privilege now of working alongside Secretary Fudge as her senior advisor for housing finance and homeownership efforts, doing this really important policy work that she talked about earlier in the program. So it's an honor, David. So thank you for the invitation and the opportunity, and thank you all for coming to Cleveland on this Juneteenth holiday to talk about this work. I had the pleasure of introducing my former colleague, who's been brilliant in all of this, and the numbers and the research that much of the work of this collaborative has been built upon, which I feel like is the strongest foundation, is when you have the evidence, the data, the information that can really help to drive change in the right places and really make an impact. So I am grateful to Jung Choi for her work, and she's going to start us by grounding us in that and how we got to this point in this plan, and then the panels will come up. So take it away, Jung, and here's the... Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see so many people out of the Zoom box, and I'm so excited to be here today. So in this presentation, if I can get my slides working. Oh. don't think it, okay, great. So in this presentation, I will quickly go over the trend of Black homeownership and explain how we got here through data. So as you heard a lot today in this event, Black homeownership rate has persistently lagged the white homeownership rate throughout history. So currently the Black homeownership rate is about 42 percentage point, which is 30 percentage point below white homeownership rate. And you can see that in this graph, this homeownership gap has been wider than the homeownership gap in 1960 before the Fair Housing Act was passed. So if we don't do anything about this, our research projects that the homeownership gap will continue to grow, and in 2040, the gap will be wider than what we have now, and Black homeownership rate will also continue to decline. So over the past 20 years, the homeownership trajectory differed largely by race and ethnicity. So if you look at the graph on the right, this is showing the differences in the homeownership rate by race and ethnicity compared to the homeownership rate in 1990. So if you look at the blue bar, we do see that the homeownership rate experienced an increase in 2020 compared to 1990 in all race and ethnic groups. However, following the Great Recession, Black homeownership rate experienced a continuous declination. So this Black homeowners are the only groups that have lower homeownership rate now compared to the homeownership rate in 1990. So racial differences in homeownership rate are strongly associated with racial wealth disparities. So in 2019, the median Black household held 1/8 of the wealth of median white households. Homeownership plays a bigger role in creating wealth for Black families compared to white families. Housing wealth currently makes up nearly 60% of total net worth of Black homeowners, compared to 43% of total net worth of white homeowners. And you can also see in the left bar here, which was pretty shocking to me, which shows that within the Black households, median Black homeowners have about 61 times higher wealth than median Black renters. So that's where we are right now. And income and education attainment does not fully explain the Black-white homeownership gap. So if you look at the graph on the left, we see that within all income buckets, Black households have lower homeownership rate than whites. Even if you look at the very highest income group, there is about 10 percentage point gap between Black households and white households in terms of homeownership. And on the right graph, I want you to focus on two numbers here. This is the home ownership by education. And what we see here is that sadly, the home ownership rate of Black households whose head have a college degree or higher education is 56%. And that home ownership rate is even lower than the home ownership rate of white households whose head did not complete high school education. So how we got here is a byproduct of many discriminatory policies and practices in the previous, throughout history. So history does play a big role here. Following the Great Depression, the federal government created redlining maps, which you see in the left side, color-coding neighborhoods to indicate where lending was insurable. Black neighborhoods were colored red and were blocked from receiving capital to buy homes and make investment. And we also currently see that many of these red neighborhoods still have a higher portion of Black households and have significantly lower homeownership rate. So although explicit discrimination have largely faded, implicit discrimination have remained and continue to affect Black households negatively. So during the housing boom, we know that Black and Hispanic communities were target of highly exploitative predatory lending practices, and we see here that Black households were more likely to offer subprime mortgages compared to white households. And this has led to significantly higher foreclosure rate during the housing bust. And in this period, many Black homeowners lost homeownership and also lost a great portion of their wealth. So following the recession, the credit market has tightened because a lot of lenders became more conservative. And this, again, disproportionately affected Black households. So you see in the left here that Black households have a disproportionately higher share of those without a FICO score, and many of them have FICO scores below 620. So this means that a lot of Black families are struggling to access the mortgage market. In the same period, we have also experienced a significant increase in home prices due to lack of supply. So this means that for many Black families who on average have lower income and lower wealth are finding it more difficult to find an affordable house that they can purchase. Also, this rise in home prices have increased the wealth disparities between those who are able to access homeownership and those who are left behind. Now, coming to 2020, again, COVID-19 has disproportionately affected households of color. So this graph shows that greater share of households of color, including Black households, are more likely to be behind their mortgage payment. So our concern is that after the forbearance period ends, a greater share of Black households will face difficulty in sustaining homeownership. So as many mentioned today, homeownership transfers from parent to children. So our research finds that children of homeowning parents and children of parents with higher wealth are significantly more likely to become homeowners. This is because they can receive financial support when making down payment and also can get better information about complicated home buying process. So the current gap in homeownership will continue for generations to come unless we do something about it. Finally, I would like to end this presentation with some positive notes. So depending on the population change and household formation, if we add 3 million more net new homeowners by 2030, we expect that the Black homeownership rate would increase by about 10 to 15 percentage point to 52 to 57%. There are currently more than 3 million mortgage-ready millennials in the U.S. nation, so we believe that this is a feasible goal to reach. As you saw in the presentation, multiple factors have led us to where we are now. So unfortunately, there is no silver bullet solution to fix the problem that we are currently facing, and we all have to be in this together. So with that, I will turn it back to Elena Macago, who will introduce our panels, who will discuss strategies that we can all work together to close the racial homeownership gap. Thank you.
Thank you, Jung. It's just always great to see the research, even though it's a little depressing, to see the numbers going in the direction that they have been. So that's, again, why this is so important. I'm excited to bring the panels up and going to invite panelists up, and then we'll get right into it since we're short on time. First, I want to invite up Cybe Richardson, Senior Vice President for Programs with the National Urban League. Thank you, Cybe. Brian Green, Vice President for Policy Advocacy at the National Association of Realtors, and Lydia Pope, who is the President of the National Association of Real Estate Brokers. And I am going to moderate a conversation. I might just stand here and do that, if that's okay. And then we're going to roll into a second panel discussion this afternoon that's going to include the affordable housing production credit and lending side of the equation, and so David I'll introduce that panel after this is over. So, without further ado, welcome, first of all, everyone. Welcome our panelists. We're going to talk quickly about housing counseling, basically components of this plan. Housing counseling, civil and consumer rights, and sustainability is what we're talking about. I want to highlight something that Jung said because I don't think it's been said enough today. We have to also be focused as much as we are on net new homeowners, on sustaining people who are currently homeowners and helping them keep their homes. There are millions of people right now, over 2 million people, who are behind on their mortgages, some up to a year, who are going to face foreclosure very soon. They're in forbearance plans. There's been a lot of safety that's been put in place to really ensure that we don't rapidly go towards foreclosure. But there's a lot of work still to be done to work through the number of people that are currently delinquent on their mortgages and at risk of losing their homes. Those people are disproportionately people of color. And so I think it's really important, because this goal is not achievable if we lose all that home ownership. That's just, we're going in the wrong direction. So just can't express enough how important the sustainability aspect of what you talked about in your data is, and the work that right now the Biden administration with HUD and other agencies are undergoing with the mortgage industry to really ensure that supports are in place so that we do not see a massive foreclosure wave at the end of this forbearance period. So had to get that in there. Thank you for listening. So I want to start, why don't we just jump right in, and I'll ask this question. Talk to me a little bit about the most important pieces of this plan to you from your organization's perspective, and how important it has been to do this in collaboration with other organizations with different, different ideas and different things, and how do you get to a concrete place where everybody agrees? And why don't you start, Cybe?
Yeah. I appreciate that, Elena, and I'll, just say you had made hello, as they say, right? I mean, I think sustainable home ownership is the objective. It's written into the title and subtitle, and housing counseling or case management for home ownership is the alpha and the omega of this plan for me. Because what it does is it heightens awareness. It also kind of deals with the emotion around of not knowing what you don't know. And I think the financial education component, which is around readiness and capability, is critical. You need trusted voices with vulnerable populations. You need credible voices for insecure populations, for whom the last great unpleasantness is recent memory. And I think we're talking about the net component to this plan is very important, underscored, because if we're losing homeowners while we're generating new homeowners, the social capital that is important, how people tap into networks, how they find places informally, those informal networks, which by other standards, the Black community formally lags behind others, but informal social capital is real. And I think that can be harnessed to let folks know what is on offer, what the trajectory of their household balance sheet can be. And I'm concerned, to be quite frank, because at the end of the day, these are public policy positions. But we need funding. You need the largesse of governments, federal and state, to be able to support the housing counseling function, because if those kind of funding pots go away, it's the Wild Wild West. You have folks on their own. It devolves into everyone fighting amongst themselves. The housing counseling industry is a safe harbor. It's also an important trusted traffic cop who can say no, but not now. And I think the not now is the kind of holding pattern we need to be in until folks can say or assess and conclude that it's safe. Every other piece of this pie, there are lingering controversies as to how these marketplaces treat communities and households of color. The housing counseling piece, I would argue, is the one where we have the most data, the most compelling evidence, in many cases, generated by you and your colleagues at Urban, which speaks to the efficacy of counseling and the at the right point in time sets of interventions for Black-led or minority-led, minority-serving institutions. A little bit of that for us, by us ethos and notion is central to the success of this plan. You cannot just have top-down, grass tops individuals and voices expecting more from the grassroots. There needs to be that kind of synchrony and synergy, and I'm thinking there are opportunities, but also headwinds, Elena, because I think at the end of the day, Secretary Fudge and her colleague can have to come through with housing counseling dollars, not just pre-purchase, but the post-purchase, the loss-mit home retention work, which is the front lines of the housing counseling fight in the field. And I think that is something where we will have to see. But elevating housing counseling alongside these other pieces of the puzzle, that is good to see, where it should be, and that's what we'll be monitoring.
Thank you for that. I will say one thing in the American Rescue Plan that the administration and Congress was able to pass earlier, which has dollars in it to assist on the eviction crisis and rental assistance programs, as well as homeowner assistance programs for families that are struggling and behind. One of the critical things right next to all of that was a big investment, $100 million investment through NeighborWorks for housing counseling, through HUD housing intermediaries. And so I think it's a fine point. I think it's a big step too, that housing counseling didn't get cut at the end of the day, and that those dollars did come through, and there's definitely a lot more that we need to do in that space.
Thanks to you.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to, Lydia, move to you because I know sustainability was big on your agenda of things to express. And at the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, you're in the trenches every day with people, your customers who are trying to purchase homes, facing all the barriers that are out there in different aspects of the home buying process. But you're also, I'm sure, dealing with the sustainability issue and people who are struggling to keep their homes and the work that you guys are doing there. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Thank you. So the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, we're the oldest and largest African-American real estate trade in the country. You're talking about over 100+ chapters. And our focus is on democracy and housing. We are the housing advocates, and we're very pleased to partner with the collaborative. What the National Association of Real Estate Brokers brings to the collaborative, we bring our expertise. When we understand that 45.1%, the African-American community, the rates are just enormously low. We have to bring that up and mark the bar. The National Association of Real Estate Brokers, what we bring to the table is we bring the 5 pillars. We talk about the faith-based and the civic engagements because we understand that it starts sometimes in the churches. We have to educate our consumers about what's happening. And your largest community are your faith base. Then we talk about the wire, the women investing in real estate. We bring that to the table because we understand that the single head of households are very important with our single women. Then you talk about diversity and inclusion, which is extremely one of the largest parts, including African Americans and being a part of the grassroots efforts. Then we talk about the generational wealth. When it comes to the millennials, the goal is to educate them to be right in the heart. And the National Association of Real Estate Brokers understands that. Our chapters are in the urban community. We're the Black realtors. This is what we do, and this is what we've always done. So bringing that to the table, it really helps. Then the last one is you're talking about the government relations on sustainability. We understand about our State of Housing and Black America report that we brought out in 2011. It's still existing today. It talks about the gap and what's happening with the wealth gap in home ownership. So as far as sustainability, our organization has the affiliates that can bring to the table. We have our NID Housing Counseling Agency, a HUD approved, who focuses on foreclosure. This is what they do, free of charge, at no cost to the consumer, so they would understand that whole wealth gap and understand how to educate them in the sense of home ownership. So the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, we're known as Naacp. We bring quite a bit to the table as it pertains to home ownership and the sustainability, because we want to keep our folks not just buying a home, you want to keep them in a home. So thank you.
Thank you, Lydia. Thank you for that. I'm going to pivot to you, Brian. I want to talk a little bit about the civil rights aspects of this, consumer rights, and fair housing, of course, because, I work at HUD now, and we care a lot and deeply about fair housing and what's happening in that space in terms of policy. So can you give us your perspectives on the plan, working together with this set of colleagues in particular, and also how does the National Association of Realtors, which is huge, what role can you play in that part of getting the real estate community that is so central to every transaction that happens in this country to understand the importance of this work and the data behind it?
Sure. So, you had asked if we had to choose, which items of the 7-point plan mean the most to us. I was thinking, my goodness, it really is sort of like a Sophie's choice, right? And these are all puzzle pieces because they really indicate that if you take one out, you don't really have a complete picture. Interestingly, I do think that the credit and lending item may be the most important, in part because I think we have a whole lot of people who are credit worthy, who are credit invisible in our current housing finance system. And that is also perhaps the most challenging part, because it really requires that we take tough look and sort of figure out what's going on there. And there is a civil rights component to that I really think HUD, Justice, and others ought to be looking at. But that isn't even the primary civil rights and consumer rights work that we did as part of this initiative. Lisa Rice and I led a work stream on civil and consumer rights. And I really want to stress that there, of course, the National Association of Realtors has to lead, and we've been leading by placing a priority on addressing discrimination in the housing market. We started a program to really deal with accountability, culture change, and training, which I've described as really 3 points of a triangle to sort of strangle discrimination as it still exists in the real estate market. That is key, but we also strongly support more government enforcement in this area. And we, as the National Association of Realtors, have advocated that HUD do more, specifically in terms of fair housing testing. This is what some people might think of as mystery shopping, where you send people out to evaluate how folks are treated. Because really, without that kind of evidence, you don't really know what's going on in the housing market. And we need to see more of that from both HUD, we need to see more of that from the Department of Justice, and it takes resources. So we want to see more resources for that. We want to see more resources for the private fair housing groups, who are the folks on the ground who do this work and do it well. We know that there's proposed legislation to do some of this in the lending space, which NAR has also supported. Right now, you can't falsify a lending application, so testers really can't do all the work they would need to do there, but our government really can and should find a way to evaluate whether people are being treated the same. But I really want to stress that there needs to be more systemic investigation as well, that this is uniquely a government role, that it can initiate investigations, does not need to rely on individuals, but can begin looking in these spaces. And that work, that sort of systemic investigation work, I think is really key. HUD has, people have been talking about systemic racism recently, but HUD has long had an office within its Office of Fair Housing called the Systemic Office. And it's always been recognized in the civil rights world that you have systems that may discriminate, or you may have widespread discrimination in certain institutions. And so we want to see more of that. I am encouraged that the Biden administration is talking more also about the barriers presented by zoning. If we want more opportunity, there needs to be housing available. And zoning, unfortunately, has a century-old history of restricting access. I was just reading about my hometown, St. Albans, New York, in Queens, and when it was created, they advertised that they had restrictions to limit it to, I think the New York Times at the time in an ad called it people of the highest type. And I thought, oh, that's code for racially restrictive covenants. And I discovered, no, they didn't actually have covenants at that point. They were using the zoning and the minimum lot sizes to keep folks out. And then when Fats Waller, the famous jazz musician, had the money to move into the neighborhood, then they instituted explicit racially restrictive covenants. So zoning was doing the purpose before that. So if you know that 100 years ago this was something that people consciously did, we need to take a look at whether it's still serving that function in our society. So we have to look at that. We have to make sure the housing is available. I described this civil rights work as do no harm. We have to at least make sure there isn't discrimination. But even if we eliminate that, my concern is when you look at these other issues, we have a legacy of discrimination and advantages and disadvantages that can self-perpetuate themselves and widen the gap if we don't do some of these other interventions.
So important. Thank you for that. And I'm so glad you mentioned the housing production, housing supply. We can solve all these problems with credit, restoration, and reaching millennials and getting everybody ready and getting everybody jobs to be able to afford this. But if there is no housing to buy, that is affordable, we are not solving that problem. So that is why it is such an important piece to stay in focus on this housing production, housing supply, the zoning issues, the things that are all about that. So with that, I'm going to say to this panel, thank you for your organization's contributions to this plan and to being here in Cleveland and to the partnership that you've established to get to the heart of these matters. Your expertise is going to make this a plan that works, and we really appreciate it. So join me in giving a round of applause to the panel. I want to invite up Yannicka Ratcliffe, who's going to be moderating the next panel. Yannicka is the Associate Vice President for Research and Policy at the Urban Institute. David Dworkin, President and CEO of the National Housing Conference. Bob Brooksmith, President and CEO of the Mortgage Bankers Association. Danielle Sidner, who is the NAACP Cleveland Branch President, who you heard from earlier, and Lisa Rice, President and CEO of the National Fair Housing Alliance. What a fantastic group. Again, I just personally want to say thank you for all that you all have done and for being here in Cleveland and for sharing this great work with us. And I'm going to turn it over to Yannicka to take it from here. So thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Elena, very much. Thanks you guys for being here. I am so honored to be here today with this incredible panel. Elena's already introduced them to you, so you know about the caliber and breadth of the groups organizations they represent. So you can get most people's bios are in the thing, so I'll skip all that. I'm going to jump right into the last 4 pieces of the puzzle that remain to be discussed today. And we're going to hear from Lisa Rice, who has to step out after she gets to talk and run. She has to go to a conference call. But she's going to talk to us about down payment assistance. Then Bob Brooksmith with the Mortgage Bankers Association is going to talk about what is needed in the credit and lending space to achieve these goals. David, who we all know by now from earlier this morning, is going to talk about the way we need to think about housing supply. Elena addressed how important that is. And finally, Danielle Sidner here from Cleveland will bring us back around full circle and really the overarching question about awareness and outreach and information that is so critical to making all this work. So, Lisa, without further ado, tell us why down payment assistance is so important. It gets its very own piece of the puzzle.
Thank you so much, Yannicka. And again, it's just a pleasure to be here back in my home state of Ohio. Got to say that again, or else Senator Brown will tap me on my knuckle. So the second component of the 7-point plan is down payment assistance. And it was really essential that we make carefully crafted down payment assistance programs a key pillar of the initiative for several reasons, and there are many, many reasons, but I'll just tick through a couple. The first is, I won't spend a lot of time talking about because Jung Choi from the Urban Institute did a really fabulous job of talking about how our federal government institutionalized. The federal government did not create redlining, but the federal government did institutionalize the system for redlining. And what that meant was the denial of homeownership opportunities were directly tied to where Black people lived. And that meant that homeownership was really elusive for Black families. And this inability to create wealth prohibited Black families from being able to pass on inheritances to their children. The second reason is that the government and private market players really devalued communities of color, right? And that served as a foundation for the much of the appraisal bias that we're seeing in the marketplace today. According to research by the Brookings Institute, over 3.2 million owner-occupied homes in majority Black neighborhoods throughout the United States have been collectively devalued by $156 billion. That's an average of $48,000 per home. And this kind of systemic devaluation really greatly restricts the ability of Black families to provide financial support for their children to help them purchase their homes. The third point is that guys, it takes a really long time to save money for a down payment. It would take 9 years for a household earning the median income to save a sufficient amount of money to be able to make just a 3% down payment and cover the closing costs for a median price home. That's a long time, and it takes even a longer time for Black households to save for that down payment because of all of the reasons that we've been talking about heretofore. The fourth point that I'll mention is according to research that is about to be released by both the U.S. Mortgage Insurers Association and by Zillow, we know that down payment, that Black families and Latino families understand that down payment is a critical prohibitive factor to their ability to becoming homeowners. Pending research from Zillow reveals that 37% of Black households and 32% of Latinx households believe that they have to put down 25% in order to buy a house. And that misunderstanding, that lack of knowledge is really tied to the fact that the majority of householders in Black and Latinx communities are renter householders. So they don't have the insider knowledge, they don't have those deep connections to trusted advisors who can give them truthful information. And then the last reason that I'll discuss, that I'll touch on, Yannicka, is that down payment programs really have not worked for Black and Latino families. We have a gazillion down payment programs, right? We have down payment programs for first-time home buyers, down payment programs for low or moderate income householders, and guess what? Those down payment programs do a great job of serving predominantly white households. They do a horrible job serving Black and Latinx households. Research from the Urban Institute reveals that by targeting first-generation home buyers who earn at or below 120% of the area median income, we can really get to a mechanism for targeting down payment assistance to Black and Latinx households. And based on this research, the National Fair Housing Alliance and the Center for Responsible Lending just recently released a framework, a special framework for first-generation down payment program that we hope to see incorporated into the infrastructure package, but it really provides a way to target more dollars to these consumers who really need it. And then I'll just close by saying that the Black Homeownership Collaborative, with the great leadership of the National Housing Conference, is placing this critical emphasis on the things that we really need to do to truly move the needle so that we can make 3 in 10 a reality, and that just cannot be done without down payment assistance.
Thank you, Lisa. That's a great answer, and thank you so much for your leadership, not just on down payment, but on all the work we're doing here, for joining us. Okay, so we do know that lack of assets to make a down payment is one of the biggest barriers to home ownership, but that's not the only one, right? The mortgage credit and lending process poses a lot of additional barriers. So, Bob, I'd love to hear what else do we need to do in that arena?
Thank you. And here, representing the Mortgage Bankers Association, it won't surprise you to learn that credit and lending is my piece of the puzzle. And just as they are interlinked, and if one piece comes out, you don't get the full picture. Unless you're going to pay cash for the house, you need a mortgage. So that's where we come in. And I'm going to be very brief and preaching to the faithful remnant here and talk about Convergence, which is our place-based initiative. We started in 2019 in Memphis, and it's coming to Columbus next month. And it's a way for us to be on the ground with all sorts of partners to move the needle locally and tackle the unique problems of a specific city or metropolitan area, and we're looking to move that beyond those 2 places as we get better at it and scale. So that's a really important part of what we're doing at the MBA. And then on access to credit, I had something in my remarks about how FHA is punitive and how it treats student loan debt And I'm happy to say that as of today, that is no longer a problem thanks to Secretary Fudge's announcement. So that's really going to move the needle. So one off the list, day one of the initiative, and one is off the list. Thank you, Elena. The appraisal gap has been mentioned. We are in conversations. Senator Brown and I had a long talk about this, and I've had a long talk with senior leadership at Fannie Mae, and we are hopeful to be able to do something about that in the near term, at least on a pilot basis. And this is where a house needs some work. Somebody's willing to come in and do the work. The house is worth more after the work is done, but because it's in an area where the housing stock is not in great shape, the appraisal for that property comes in below what one could sell it for, and every lender says, I will lend you based on the lesser of the sales price or the appraised value. It really holds back rehabilitation. We think that lending based on the cost in that circumstance is warranted, and we're hopeful for big progress there, which will help all over the country. Down payment assistance, we couldn't agree more, Lisa, that while there are a jillion programs, they're all over the map, they're hard to administer. We're working very hard at the MBA to try to make those programs workable and work for the right people, so we couldn't agree with you more there. Credit scoring is another barrier to home ownership, particularly in communities of color. How could it not be that if you pay your rent on time and you go to buy a house with a lower payment, that's not just sort of an obvious, of course, the person is creditworthy. So we're working on that. And special purpose credit programs, I was honored to co-write with Lisa to Secretary Fudge a letter saying, please clarify the fair housing implications of this so that we can really unleash the power of that to focus on communities that have been historically underserved and held back. And a really boring mortgagey thing called specified pools, which simply means if you have loans like first-time home buyers, lower loan amounts that are less likely to pay off quickly, if you put them in the same pool, the investors will pay more for them and we can pass the savings on to the borrower. So that's boring and technical, but it will get better pricing to this part of the market. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. So we've got 9 or so, 10 years to work on these, so one every other day or something.
There you go.
It's a very own set of puzzle pieces there. Okay, so speaking of appraisal gaps in property, that kind of brings us to David's question, which is about housing supply and how do we need the supply to respond?
Absolutely. And if you were worried that we weren't going to get into enough detail about how we were going to do this, then I would just refer you back to Bob to talk about specified pools. So, you know, I think it's a mystery to anyone that if you don't have enough houses, then you can't satisfy increased demand. And the problem with that is not to lower demand, or the solution for that is not to lower demand. It's to increase supply. And this is essential. We are short, by estimates I've seen, of anywhere between 3 and 5 million houses that are affordable to most Americans. And this is a crisis. This is the highest that number has ever been. And there's a reason for this shortage. We always had some shortage of the very affordable housing. But what happened in the Great Recession is we lost a whole segment of the market of home builders who specialized in first-time home owner properties. And these smaller loans and the smaller homes became harder and harder to do. And what happened is that we were building about a 1.3 million or so homes a year on a rolling average basis for 20 years. You would always see somewhere between 1.1 when it was really low, 1.5 in a hot market, always right around 1.3. And that number crashed below 500,000 homes in the immediate wake of the Great Recession. And it's never really recovered. It has crawled back, few thousand loans here, few thousand homes here, few thousand homes there, every year over an extended period of time. We're finally at a point where we're almost to that level. And when you add up all of those shortfalls, they are cumulative. And the increased demand continues to manifest itself. We have a whole generation of millennials. You know, people used to say, oh, well, millennials don't want to be homeowners. You know, they want to rent in these hip apartments downtown. And you know what? That's great when you're 23 or 24. The big thing about millennial population is that their household formation, when they get married and start having kids, is a little later than the previous generation. Well, that was true of the Gen Xers, and it was true of the baby boomers. And we see that consistently throughout the 20th century. So now we have this generation of millennials who are forming households. They're looking for a place to live. And if you've ever had 2 kids, you know a 2-bedroom apartment is not cutting it. And you're looking for that bigger place. And people aren't building it. So we have got to build more housing that's affordable to more Americans. We've got to look deep into why this is the case. And there are a lot of reasons. And we need to get it done. And so this is an important element of this plan because all of these pieces are interrelated. If we have a supply and demand crisis where supply is not meeting demand, housing prices are going to continue to rise. And they'll overwhelm the other things that we are doing. And so we've got to address it. We've got to make it easier for home builders to get the credit they need to acquire property and build it and develop the land so that they can then sell the house and recycle those funds. And we have to make it easier for lenders to make loans that are smaller and that are for first-time home buyers, not for rental. So I think those are just some of the things that are critical in this space.
Thank you, David. And it reminds me, and it was said earlier today, that generations ago, when this country put its mind to building enough homes for a whole new generation of mostly white people and getting them mortgages and getting them into the ladder to the middle class, they did it. And so there's nothing that we can't do now. All right, Danielle, bring us home. You know, we've got a lot of people qualified for mortgages. We've got a lot of houses out there. But if people don't know about it and they don't understand the opportunity that they have, or they're intimidated by the process or feel somehow not welcome to it, it's not going to catch hold. So what has to happen in the outreach, marketing, information space?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things that Lisa talked about at the beginning is that programs are not new. We've had programs for a long time. And the existence of programs that don't work make people not trust programs. And so I think that we have to have better messaging and think about what's going to make any of this work different. And that has to be the lead effort in trying to convince people that this time it's going to be different, and this time we're going to get it right, and we're going to make these programs accessible, or we're making, really, instead of programs, but systemic change. Things like student loan debt not being a part of the calculation, that's a systems change that's going to impact a lot of people. And so from an NAACP perspective, we recognize that we're not designed to be the one doing the lending, but we know that people trust us. And so using those relationships with organizations like the Realtist and Urban League and others that are trusted partners in the community that can help people navigate some of the things that seem confusing. You talked about the number of individuals, or at least I did earlier, about the number of individuals who don't come from households where somebody is a homeowner, then that puts you at a disadvantage in terms of navigating the process and feeling intimidated. And so from an outreach perspective, I think one of the things that we know we have the ability to do as organizations that are already on the ground is be connecting with the entities that will be delivering the programs themselves. So the lending institutions, organizations like Cleveland Neighborhood Progress, who's in the room today, that are working in communities looking at affordable housing. I think the thing that we have to really, really pay attention to, though, is if we don't see the adoption of the programs immediately, we have to be willing to pivot. And I think that sometimes is really hard when we put together really robust programs that we're all confident in, they're going to work, right? 3x30 is aggressive. But what are we doing along the way to measure those outreach efforts and say, how many touches do we have to have in homes and communities and neighborhoods? What are we going to do different than we've done in all the previous programs from an outreach perspective? And really making sure that we are doing the work necessary to, again, build trust, to change the message that these are not just, fly-by-night programs that we're trying to check boxes and we don't care about you afterwards, because We also talked earlier about the number of individuals who are on the brink of foreclosure right now. So how are we addressing that as a part of this strategy and making sure that that's a part of the messaging and the outreach effort? Because otherwise you're just replacing new homeowners with people who have lost their homes. And so I know that all of us are deeply committed to this, or wouldn't be here on a Friday afternoon talking about this or watching on C-SPAN, but it is going to be that concerted effort to change the messaging, in my opinion, this time around, and to really rely on community partners that have trust to be able to help navigate people through the process.
Well, thank you. When you talk about measuring success, that's music to Urban's ears. But, when you think about how to measure trust, I think that's a really great direction to point us in. I will offer one last question since I have the prerogative here. But, we have seen even well-intentioned programs still, go out there and still serve a majority of white households instead of households of color. And so I wonder what, as you maybe each one of the three of you, or someone can speak on Lisa's behalf too, what are we going to do that's going to kind of make sure that the black households are going to be able to take advantage of all of the things we've been talking about here?
Well, I'll take a shot at that with the thing I mentioned about special purpose credit programs. And the reason we need Secretary Fudge to weigh in there is because they can target the black community. We could devise programs specifically accessible only to the black community through the special purpose credit program if we have assurance that we won't run afoul of the Fair Housing Act. We can't take that risk because it's targeting to a specific race, but there is a program available, and if we can do that, then that's the only community it would benefit. And you saw from the slides that even the most well-off African Americans own homes at a much lower rate than whites. So there's a clear reason to do it, and if we can get that done, I think that would address that issue.
Thank you. Very helpful.
I would just add to that I think when we're talking about programs as well, your question also is about, like, how do we make sure that more white folks don't do it? Sometimes it's the easy route, right? When you have these conversations about getting into the black community, being able to build trust, that actually takes work. And sometimes when you get to the end of the year and you get to your goals and your metrics and you're like, well, I just need to get some people in houses, then people start deviating from how things were designed. And so I think the commitment and then holding the individuals at this table accountable for saying, we won't cut corners, we'll do what's difficult, and we'll make sure that whatever is necessary to get into the black community, to get these programs executed, that is all we will focus on, not just on the metrics overall, but making sure we're getting the right metrics.
Very good. And then, David, last word to you, and you can close us out.
I would say that it's not a zero-sum game. The problem isn't white people or black people getting this help. I want every qualified white person who wants to be a homeowner to become one. The white homeownership rate reflects that, and it's already at a level that most economists say is about as high as it gets. The problem is that we haven't marketed these programs well enough to people of color, and we have to actually hold ourselves accountable to making them available and closing the deal with them. When I started in the mortgage business, the president of the company had a saying, "You are what you track." And if you're not tracking it, you're not doing it. And so I think one of the things that's really important is we need to hold ourselves individually accountable. How many loans am I making to African Americans? How many loans am I making to Hispanics? What did I do last year? Why am I not doing 5% more this year than I did last year? And I think that kind of discipline is how the entire economy operates when it operates successfully. And I think we're going to have to pay attention to that. And if you're not paying attention to it, we need to talk about why, because there's always a reason. So I think that's, how we're going to get there. We're going to get there by getting there.
Thank you. Hands of this panel.
And
David?
thank you all. It's been a great day. It's a lot to think about. And I hope everybody gets a good night's sleep tonight, and because we're going to be losing a lot of sleep putting this in place.
Danielle, anybody gets the word trash, you can be tied